The afternoon Lucinda Hartwell spotted the little boy outside the Sunflower Daycare on Clement Avenue. She had been taking the long way home from errands for 3 Thursdays in a row. She told herself she was just driving, that the route happened to take her past this particular stretch of road on this particular afternoon, that it was coincidence, not intention, that slowed her hands on the wheel as the car drifted past the daycare fence, and she looked almost involuntarily toward the small children being gathered up and walked to waiting cars. And then she saw him. He was sitting on a bench near the gate with a red backpack at his feet, a little under 2 years old, his dark curls catching the afternoon light. Even from a distance, she could see the shape of his jaw, the particular set of his brow. Lucinda pulled over. She sat behind the wheel for 2 full minutes. Then she got out and walked to the gate. The young teacher was polite and cautious, in the way that good teachers are with strangers. "Can I help you?" "He's my grandson," Lucinda said. "His mother asked me to collect him today." "I'll need to confirm that. What's his name?" "Ellie." She had only learned the name 4 days ago. The teacher stepped back and made the call. 7 minutes later, Freya arrived. She didn't rush across the parking lot. She walked with her keys in her hand, her face closed in a way that Lucinda recognized. That particular expression Freya had always worn when she was absorbing something she didn't plan to let show. She picked up Eli from the bench. She spoke briefly to the teacher. Then she turned and looked at Lucinda directly. "You need to leave," Freya said. "Freya, if you could just—" "I'm only going to say this once." Freya shifted Eli to her hip. He rested his cheek against her shoulder and watched Lucinda with quiet, steady eyes. "You made your choice. I remember exactly what you said to me. So does my mother. Don't come here again." She walked to her car. Lucinda stood at the fence and watched her go. The afternoon sun was flat and cold, the parking lot almost empty. A few leaves skittered across the asphalt. It had been almost 2 years since Lucinda had told Freya that the baby she was carrying didn't belong to Rowan. Almost 2 years since she had watched Freya walk out the front door of the Ancaster house with one bag. She had told herself, standing in the hallway that day, that she had done what was necessary, that a mother's first obligation was to her son. Standing in the daycare parking lot now, watching Freya's car pull away, she felt the particular heaviness of having been completely, irrevocably wrong. This is the part that came before all of it. Freya Calloway had grown up in Brantford, Ontario, in a house on a quiet residential street that her mother Bette had rented for 19 years. The house was small and always slightly cold in the winters, but Bette kept it clean and arranged with a kind of careful attention that made it feel bigger than it was. There were plants in the kitchen window and mismatched chairs around the table and a quilt on the couch that had been there so long it had become part of the house itself. Bette had raised Freya alone. Freya's father had left when she was 4, packed a bag one Tuesday and didn't come back, and Bette never sought an explanation and never offered one. She simply continued. She worked as a domestic cleaner through most of Freya's childhood, took on shifts at a church thrift shop when her back made the cleaning too difficult, and made sure there was always something warm on the stove by 6 o'clock. What they had was modest. What they had was enough. Freya was 26 when she started working as a personal support worker at a long-term care home in Hamilton. The job was physically demanding in ways that accumulated quietly, and emotionally demanding in ways that most people who hadn't done it couldn't fully appreciate. Freya was good at it. She had a kind of unhurried steadiness that older residents responded to, a quality that couldn't be trained, only carried. She met Rowan at a mutual friends gathering in September, a low-key dinner party in the East End of Hamilton that she almost didn't attend because she'd had a long week and the couch was appealing. She went because Bette told her she went out too rarely, and Bette was usually right about these things. Rowan was quiet in groups, in a way that felt like genuine attention rather than shyness. He was 30, worked in commercial project management, had a dry sense of humor that arrived without warning. He sat across from Freya at dinner and asked about her work with the specificity of someone who was actually curious. Not the vague, socially graceful curiosity people performed at dinner parties, but the kind where he followed up, where he remembered what she'd said 3 exchanges later. He called her 2 days afterward. They dated for nearly 3 years. The relationship was not dramatic. It was the quiet, durable kind that doesn't photograph well but sustains things. He remembered her coffee order and the name of the resident at work she'd been worried about, and the book she'd mentioned wanting to read. She learned that he was a person who fixed what was broken rather than waiting for someone else to fix it, who apologized specifically rather than generally, who could sit in comfortable silence with her on the couch on a Friday night and make her feel more rested than a full week of good sleep. He proposed in the spring in Bette's backyard, standing beside the lilac bush that had struggled through a late frost and bloomed anyway. He said he'd wanted to do it somewhere that mattered to her, and her mother mattered to her, and he knew Bette wouldn't mind if he borrowed her garden for 5 minutes. Freya said yes before he'd fully finished the question. Lucinda Hartwell had been widowed when Rowan was 7, and she had organized her life around him since then, with the competence and focus of someone who has decided that what she still has is worth everything. She owned the family home in Ancaster outright, a substantial Victorian with original trim and high ceilings, and had managed the insurance money from Rowan's father with enough discipline that she had lived comfortably without working for the past decade. She had opinions about most things and expressed them in the tone of someone accustomed to being agreed with. The first time Freya met her, Lucinda opened the front door before they could knock and looked at Freya with the thorough assessment of someone conducting a quiet evaluation she had already mostly completed. The afternoon was polite in the surface sense. Tea was served. Freya was asked about her work, her background, her mother. Lucinda listened to the answers with an expression that was attentive without being warm. "Your mother raised you on her own," Lucinda said at one point. "Not a question." "She did." Freya met her gaze. "She worked hard, she was consistent, and she did a good job. I'm proud of where I come from." Something registered in Lucinda's face, not approval, but a faint recalibration, as if she had prepared herself for a different kind of answer. Rowan proposed the wedding be held in the spring, with real planning, a proper venue, something that marked the occasion with the weight it deserved. Lucinda suggested, with measured calm, that a small backyard ceremony would be more suitable, given the short engagement. Given the circumstances, she said, and did not elaborate on what the circumstances were. Rowan pushed back. Lucinda held firm. Freya told Rowan quietly later that the size of the wedding didn't matter to her. What mattered was that Bette was there, and the day was real, and Rowan was in it. She meant it, but it still stung. They moved into the Ancaster house after the wedding, a practical arrangement while they saved toward a place of their own. The plan was a year, maybe 18 months. Living with Lucinda was not loud or dramatic. It was the slow erosion kind. The thermostat reset after Freya adjusted it. The loaded dishwasher reorganized without comment. The way Lucinda directed conversation over dinner toward subjects that required Rowan's expertise and left no natural opening for Freya's. Small things. Consistent things. The kind of friction that's impossible to name without sounding thin-skinned, which is exactly what makes it effective. And then, there was Felicia. Felicia Drummond had dated Rowan briefly a few years earlier. A few months, nothing serious, Rowan had said, and Freya had had no reason to think otherwise. Felicia had recently moved 2 streets away, a proximity Lucinda mentioned with visible pleasure. She dropped by often, always with something in her hands. A container of baked goods, a bottle of Niagara wine, a magazine she'd thought Lucinda might enjoy. She was easy and bright in company, the kind of person who always seemed to have exactly the right amount of energy for the room. Lucinda adored her. Freya watched the way Lucinda was with Felicia. The laugh that came more easily, the forward lean in the armchair, the darling that she had never once used with Freya, and understood without anyone saying it that she was being compared, that she was losing. She didn't tell Rowan. She kept believing that time would do what patience could not accomplish by force. She was still believing this in November when Lucinda came to her with a carefully composed expression of distress and told her that her late husband's watch, an heirloom piece that had belonged to his father before him, was missing from the bedroom dresser, along with a pair of pearl earrings and a gold bracelet. "I haven't been in your room," Freya said immediately. "I'm not saying you have." Lucinda's voice was gentle, calibrated. But the thing behind her eyes said something entirely different. The week that followed was the worst of Freya's adult life. Felicia came forward, hesitantly, she said, so reluctantly, to mention that she had seen Freya going into Lucinda's bedroom on a weekday afternoon when Lucinda was out. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. She hadn't wanted to say anything. But given the situation, "That didn't happen," Freya told Rowan. "Freya, look at me. That did not happen." She watched him struggle with it. She watched him want to believe her, and she watched the wanting lose. The security camera footage from Lucinda's system wasn't available that week. A malfunction, Lucinda said. A neighbor had been produced, someone Freya didn't know, who'd seen a woman matching her description near the side of the house on a particular afternoon. It was vague. It was enough. I don't know what to think, Rowan said. I don't want to believe it. But there's nothing, Freya said, because I didn't do it. But she could see that it didn't matter. The story had been told too well by too many voices, and Rowan was standing in the middle of it trying to find solid ground where there wasn't any. 8 days after the watch went missing, Lucinda sat down with both of them and said, with the measured sadness of someone delivering news they have not enjoyed arriving at, that she felt it would be better, for everyone, if Freya stayed somewhere else while things settled. This is my house, Lucinda said, and I'm not comfortable, I'm sorry. Rowan said nothing. Freya looked at him for a long moment. She had the peculiar sensation of watching something she loved move away from her while she stood perfectly still. Then she told them she was pregnant. She had been holding it for 3 weeks, carrying it carefully, waiting for a moment that felt right. A small bright thing she'd been saving. Lucinda didn't flinch. That doesn't change the situation. It's your grandchild, Freya said. We don't know that, Lucinda said it simply. Final. Rowan didn't disagree. Freya stood up. She went upstairs and packed one bag, methodically, carefully, not rushing, and came back down and walked through the hall and out the front door and did not look back at the house with the lilac bush and the original trim and the high ceilings, and she did not look back at Rowan standing in the doorway. Bette was awake when Freya arrived. She always seemed to know. She opened the door, took in the bag, the expression, the particular quality of her daughter's silence, and said only, "Come in, I'll make tea." They sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the November wind moved through the street in long, quiet gusts. Eventually Freya talked and Bette listened, and when there was nothing left to say, Bette set down her mug and said, "You'll stay here as long as you need. That's settled." Miles Beckett lived 2 doors down. He was a contractor in his mid-30s who'd moved to Brantford from Kingston a few years back for work, and stayed because the staying was easier than the leaving. He'd said once, which Freya understood. He was quiet and practically capable in the specific way of people who build things that have to hold weight, not given to unnecessary speech, not given to unnecessary action, but reliable in the way that good tools are reliable, without drama. He had helped Bette with a pipe leak the previous winter. From that point on, he had adopted the position of low-key neighborly presence, shoveling Bette's walk after heavy snowfalls, dropping by when something needed lifting. He noticed that Freya was back. He noticed she was pregnant and navigating it alone. He didn't comment on either, just became quietly more present in small, useful ways. A bag of groceries when both she and Bette were sick in the same week. Firewood stacked near the back door when the temperatures dropped. When Freya tried to thank him, he said, "I was raised to be useful. I try to actually be useful, rather than just saying so." She found this funny in a way that surprised her. She had not laughed at anything for a while. The divorce papers came in February. Freya signed them at Bette's kitchen table, Bette standing at the counter with her back turned in the careful way she always stood when something was too hard to face directly. Rowan had sent a message 2 weeks earlier, saying he was sorry. He hadn't said he believed her. He hadn't said his mother was wrong. He'd said he was sorry things had gone this way, which was not the same as any of those things. Freya didn't respond. Eli was born in April. The morning was cold still, frost on the roof of the car in the hospital parking lot, the sky that pale particular blue that Ontario does in early spring. Labor was 7 hours. At the end of it, when the nurse placed Eli on Freya's chest, she looked at him and started crying in a way she couldn't have stopped if she'd tried. Not from sadness, but from the sheer, disorienting realness of him. He had Rowan's chin, the slight cleft, the set of it. She noticed immediately, registered it, said nothing. The months that followed were hard in ways she'd anticipated, and tender in ways she hadn't. Bette sang to Eli in the evenings, old songs, half-remembered hymns and folk melodies from her own mother's kitchen. And watching Bette's face with him, that particular softness she only ever showed when she thought no one was looking, made something settle in Freya's chest. She went back to work part-time when Eli was 3 months old. Found a small apartment 2 blocks from Bette. Miles helped her move on a Saturday morning without being asked, arriving with a borrowed truck and a friend of his, working steadily and efficiently and not making it a thing. "You didn't have to do this," Freya said. handing him coffee from the carry-out bag. I know. He drank the coffee. Where do you want the bookcase? She pointed. He moved it. Life arranged itself into a new shape. Not the shape she'd planned, but real, and hers, and with Eli in the middle of it, learning to hold his own cup, learning to pull himself up against the couch, learning to look up at her with his steady, watching eyes. It held its own kind of weight. Rowan and Felicia's wedding was in August. Freya heard about it without seeking it out. She processed the information the same way she processed weather forecasts for places she no longer lived. She noted it and moved on. But what happened after the wedding was something people talked about in the quiet, careful way. They talk about things that are too satisfying and too awful at once. Felicia, inside the Ancaster house, was not what she had been outside of it. The attentiveness, the baked goods, the carefully chosen gifts. These diminished sharply once there was no longer a performance to maintain. She slept late, left things where they fell, spent freely and without consultation. Lucinda, who had waited years for this particular daughter-in-law, found herself doing more housework than she had in a decade, and liking it considerably less each week. And then, in January, 9 months after the wedding, a man appeared at the front door representing a collections agency. The debt was substantial. Credit lines, personal loans, a business financing arrangement that Felicia had apparently been building for over a year, and at the bottom of the paperwork was a document that Lucinda had signed 8 months earlier. She remembered Felicia presenting it across the kitchen table, telling her it was a standard co-applicant form for a small investment vehicle. Very routine, just needed a secondary signature from a family member. Lucinda had signed it without reading it. Felicia was gone by then. Her car, her clothes, the expensive coffee machine she had asked Lucinda to buy for the kitchen. Gone. Rowan sat in his father's old armchair and looked at the numbers and felt the particular cold clarity of a person who has finally, too late, added everything up correctly. She set Freya up, didn't she? Lucinda didn't answer immediately. Mom, his voice was flat, the watch, the earrings. The neighbor who happened to see something. Felicia coming forward so reluctantly. The cameras that happened not to be working. I thought I was protecting you. You helped her frame my wife. He stood up from the armchair. You helped her throw my pregnant wife out of this house. And then you helped bring in the woman who just emptied your accounts and disappeared. He left the room. Lucinda sat alone in the Ancaster house, which the lawyer would confirm, 2 weeks later, would need to be listed and sold to address the debt she had co-signed without reading. Rowan called Freya on a Thursday evening, the same day she'd stood in the daycare parking lot and told Lucinda to leave. She saw his name on the screen and waited, then answered. He said he was sorry. He said it in several ways, working through it, and she could tell he'd been sitting with it for some time before he called. He said he knew the truth now. He said his mother had admitted it. He said he should have believed Freya, had wanted to believe her, and had made a catastrophic failure of his own judgment out of a combination of love for his mother and a cowardice he was still ashamed of. Freya listened to all of it. I appreciate you saying that, she said when he stopped. I needed to hear it 18 months ago. I needed it when I was standing in your driveway at 9 o'clock at night with one bag. It mattered then. It doesn't undo anything now. I want to be in Eli's life. She looked out the kitchen window. Bette's light was on next door. The street was quiet, the first snow of the season, drifting down in small, deliberate flakes. I won't make that harder than it needs to be, she said. But it happens on my terms, at my pace, and you earn it. She ended the call. She set the phone on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to Eli moving around in the living room, narrating some private game to himself in the partial language of a not-quite 2-year-old. Then there was a knock at the door. Miles, with a container of soup from Bette and his coat half-buttoned against the cold. He looked at her face and didn't ask. Come in, she said. Ellie's been asking about your dog all week. The gray mutt made his customary serious inspection of the apartment. Eli followed on unsteady legs, one hand trailing along the couch for balance, talking steadily at the dog about everything and nothing. They ate at the table, Miles and Freya and Bette, who had come over when she saw the lights on, because that was what Bette did. The soup was good. It was always good. Outside, the snow fell on the street, and on the roof of Freya's car, and on the maple out front that had gone bare a month ago, but would come back in the spring, the way things do when you give them enough time and the right conditions. After a while, Eli climbed into Freya's lap and leaned his whole warm weight against her and fell asleep between one breath and the next the way small children sleep. Completely, without reservation, as if the world is entirely safe and the person holding them is the whole of it. She sat with her arms around him and listened to Bette and Miles talking across the table, their voices low and easy, in the way of people comfortable in each other's company. She had lost the life she'd planned. She had lost it through other people's cruelty and her own husband's failure of nerve, and there had been months when that loss was a physical weight she carried, everywhere she went. But Eli's hair smelled like his shampoo, and Bette was laughing at something Miles had said, and the snow outside was soft and indifferent, and covered everything equally. The houses of people who had done terrible things, and the houses of people who had survived them. Freya tucked her chin against the top of her son's head and held him. This was the life she had. It was real, and it was hers, and she had built it herself from what remained after everything else was taken. And there was no version of the future in which she would trade it back.